Hello and welcome to Sunday Politics. The big election interviews continue. Today it's the turn of People Before Profit. The party's only MLA, Jerry Carroll, is with me in the studio. The lead singer of one of our biggest bands tells me he fears a lack of funding could lead to artists giving up.
There's so many extraordinary artists. We have an incredible array, and I know that there's so many that could do with some small help to get them to that next level.
And with me to share her thoughts on those stories and more, Freya McClements, the Northern editor of the Irish Times. We're working our way through a series of leaders' interviews both here on Sunday Politics and on The View. Today I'm joined by Jerry Carroll from People Before Profit. He's been an MLA for West Belfast since 2016, and that's the constituency he's running in July's general election. Welcome to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme. Last time out in 2019, in the Westminster election, you got just over 6,000 votes. Sinn Féin's Paul Mackey got almost 3.5 times that. How can you possibly hope to bridge that kind of gap on July the 4th?
Well, I think, Mark, we've got a proven track record of standing up for those failed by government policies. They've made big promises in every election that they don't keep. We've stood with health workers who are fighting for better pay and funding and services, whilst the government have effectively cut their pay and cut services. Stormont have refused to build homes, whilst we have campaigned and used our platform to advocate for the building of social homes. And those in power have promised to deliver on childcare, on poverty, but poverty levels have spiked. The childcare costs have gone through the roof. So that's what we're offering this election. We're out to fight for every single vote and every single seat in West Belfast and also the other areas that we're standing.
So you're running in 3 constituencies, West Belfast, where you're standing, also North Belfast and Foyle. You could say it's a perfect storm as far as People Before Profit is concerned, because the economic climate, the financial climate is one where you should be doing well. But is it fair to say, if you're being absolutely honest here, you're not expecting to win a seat? This is about building the brand, building the votes for future elections, particularly in local government and the Assembly.
Well, like I said, I mean, it's up to the voters, you know. We're in the fight for every vote and we want to win a seat. And I think a People Before Profit seat is worth more to people out there than other parties in the sense.
You need to be honest as well, don't you? I mean, of course you want to win a seat, and of course it's up to the voters, and nobody would try to preempt what the voters might do on July the 4th. But when you look at the last election, you know, Sinn Féin got 54% of the vote, you got 16%, and the Sinn Féin candidate was well down on 2 years before, and you were well up. So, you know, even taking that into account, you're nowhere near winning a Westminster seat.
Well, nothing's certain in politics. I mean, look at the South elections recently. Look at what's going on in France and the instability there. So, and you've seen globally what's happened in the last year. Nothing is certain in politics. And we're up for taking seats. We're up for winning as much votes as we can. And if elected, we would obviously take a seat and use that platform to advance the struggles of working class people, which are many and varied. And unfortunately, those establishment parties have failed to act on even issues.
You would take that seat, just to be clear. You would take that seat. You're not an abstentionist party.
I'm not an abstentionist. I would hold my nose and go in and use a platform to hopefully say goodbye to Rishi Sunak, but also to hold Keir Starmer to account, because there's not much that separates him from the Tory party. And I think it's important to have an MP for West Belfast that uses that platform to expose the British government over Palestine, over public services, over the underfunding of this place, but also to use that to organise people and encourage people to fight back as much as they can, as much as possible.
Just one example of a policy issue that I was keen to get your thoughts on. The Infrastructure Minister has announced he's introducing a small £20 fee for people making a first-time application for a Smart Pass, while retaining free public transport for the over 60s. You've called for that one-off fee to be scrapped, but if it helps the Minister keep the scheme in place, surely that's a good thing.
Well, I mean, we led a campaign, Mark, last summer with other activists, people who weren't in People Before Profit, anti-poverty campaigners, to say we should maintain free travel, and actually we should extend it for others if we're going in any direction. But that slapping of a fee on people is unacceptable.
It's a very small fee, be honest, £20.
Yeah, but there's no need for it. I mean,
fee.
We need proper investment in our public services, and these sort of charges on people, it puts barriers in place for people. It's an obstacle for people. And it's expensive.
Do you know how much free public transport costs the Department of Infrastructure in Northern Ireland at the moment? I mean, do you actually know the figure?
Well, it depends what figure you're going to refer to.
Well, I mean,
talk about the total revenue, or are you going to talk about further people?
Well, the cost, as I understand it, of free public transport to the department is £44.6 million a year, and that is double what it was when the scheme was set up 17 years ago. So where's that money coming from?
Well, we can't afford not to have measures like this. I mean, we know the cost, financial and also health cost of loneliness. I mean, this scheme was designed when it was originally implemented to alleviate loneliness and get people out of their homes. And there's a massive health and social benefits to it. Stormont can afford this if it's a priority for Stormont parties.
But the question is, what's a priority? And there are so many priorities. And you know about, you're up
money,
there day and daily.
Indeed,
you know about the pressure in education and health and infrastructure.
And we can't pit.
They're all priorities, we're told.
Well, I mean, you ask the executive parties about their programme for government, I'm sure you'll be waiting on an answer.
Still no sign of it.
They've handed £2 billion back to the Tories, and this is from the Audit Office, Mark, £2 billion back to the Tories over the last 5 years. They spend £72 million every single year on an industrial de-rating programme, which gives money, handouts, to Coca-Cola, Moy Park and other companies.
So you're very clear that that would be in your sights in terms of closing down a perk or a benefit that you see as unjustified?
For big companies, 100%.
OK. What about the other issue of the domestic rates cap? Would you do something about that? Would you do something about prescription charges? Would you do something about tuition fees?
Well, the problem with revenue raising, I mean, we've said this in different sort of Stormont debates, the Finance Committee and generally on the floor. I mean, we're not opposed to revenue raising per se. I think it was maybe your Red Lines podcast, I said it as well. Yeah. But the problem is, revenue raising is often used as a way to can we punish working class people. So if you're talking about raising corporation tax, if you're talking about ending industrial de-rating, if you're talking about stop handing money back, billions back to the Tories, we're for that. But if you're talking about making life harder for working class people, those are revenue raising measures we will not go along with, and we will do our utmost to campaign against them. Well,
you know that people working in the manufacturing sector will say that if you stop industrial de-rating, you're going to levy more costs on manufacturing companies, and that means that they, for example, won't have the wherewithal to employ more people. So ultimately, it is working people who are going to lose out.
Well, not at all. I mean, you're talking about Moy Park and Coca-Cola, for example. These are big.
Well, those are two examples, but they're not the only examples.
There's others out there, of course. But
lots of others out there.
They're big companies.
Yeah,
they're big.
They're
companies.
Not all big companies.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Industrial de-rating is for the benefit of big organisations.
Not necessarily big organisations.
Well, yeah, big
small engineering companies as well.
Big organisations shouldn't avail of it, and it's companies like Moy Park, Coca-Cola, and others who are availing of it. And quite often, a lot of these companies who do avail of either industrial de-rating or other benefits from the state, quite often those workers are campaigning and demanding for better conditions or better pay. So it doesn't mean and doesn't follow that if the government invests in them or gives them a handout, that those workers benefit from that, not at all.
I know you've said that international issues have been raised on the doorstep when you've been canvassing during this campaign. And you like to look at the politics of Northern Ireland, this place, in an international global context. You spoke at yesterday's Ireland's Future event in Belfast. You designate as other at Stormont. But to be clear, People Before Profit is a nationalist party.
No, we're not. We're socialist, Mark. I've said this, I don't know how many times.
Support a referendum on the constitutional future of Northern Ireland.
I mean, therefore, are you going to now say the Alliance Party are unionists because they want to maintain the Northern state as part of the UK? You probably wouldn't, right? So we'll leave that for another day. But we're for ending the border, but we stand in tradition of people like James Connolly, socialists who did everything that they could to fight to unite working class people.
Yeah, I understand that you designate as socialist,
yes,
but you do
socialist.
Support a 32-county socialist state.
We are for ending the border in Ireland, yes, we're for United Ireland.
That would make you a nationalist party, wouldn't it? In the eyes of unionists,
we designate ourselves. I mean, we may be many things in the eyes of the DUP and others, but we designate ourselves. We're an other in Stormont terms because...
So you don't like the word nationalist, but you do support a 32-county socialist Ireland?
Absolutely, of course.
OK, so people can make their judgments then. It's just unionists in North Belfast, for example, may just want to bear that in mind whenever they're considering who to vote for.
Well, I'm telling you what we are. We're not nationalists. We're a socialist organisation, and we've made that clear on the BBC countless times. So I know it takes a lot for maybe some of the BBC to get their heads around that, but we're clear on where we stand. You're clear on where you stand, and we're clear as well that, and you've said yourself, you do support a 32-county socialist republic. OK, we will leave it there. We're out of time. Jerry Carroll, thanks very much indeed. Time for a first word with my guest of the day, Freya McClements from the Irish Times.
Just on that point, just to pick up on that point first of all, is Jerry Carroll potentially dancing on the head of a pin there when he says he's socialist and he isn't nationalist, but yet concedes he supports a 32-county socialist republic? Yeah, it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck.
Yeah, it is a duck, and you've just taken the words right out of my mouth. I mean, it's splitting hairs. It's dancing on the head of a pin. With apologies to Jerry, I think that most people out there will look at Jerry and will look at People Before Profit and say, this is pretty clear. This is a party that supports a united Ireland. And I was at the Ireland's Future conference in Belfast yesterday. Jerry was one of the speakers at it. It was quite clear that he supported a united Ireland. And I think this is of significance because a lot of the policies of People Before Profit, Jerry making the point that they are a socialist party, when they talk about their financial plans, that is something that will appeal to working class, not just working class people from many different backgrounds across Northern Ireland. But I think for unionists listening, and particularly you make the point about when they're standing in North Belfast, that is something that they will take into consideration. And they would also look at this and say, this is splitting hairs. This is a nationalist party. You support a united Ireland. OK, and it's not the only issue that we're talking about, but it's in the interest of transparency, it's worth spending a little bit of time just talking about that. Jerry Carroll has certainly had some very considerable electoral successes in the past, no question about that. And the party has had a number of successes in Belfast and outside Belfast, particularly up in Derry. In terms of winning a Westminster seat, that's not presumably what this is really about, is it? Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the figures, and of course any politician going into an election will of course say they're going all out and they want to win the seat, and that is what they're trying to do. When you look at the figures, I mean, Sinn Féin were at over 50% in the last election in West Belfast, for example. That was the constituency in which People Before Profit did best. Realistically, there's a majority of around 15,000 there. That's going to be a tall order for People Before Profit for Jerry to overturn. But what I think is going to be interesting, and the point that Jerry made about what was being raised on the doors in terms of the international situation, and particularly Palestine. I mean, there was that really strong disquiet among Sinn Féin grassroots around Sinn Féin's position on Palestine, around the fact that the Sinn Féin leadership went and met Joe Biden in the White House for St. Patrick's Day. That hasn't gone away, so it'll be interesting to see if that translates into even a bit of a protest vote with people who maybe would be Sinn Féin voters who are unhappy with the party's stance on Palestine and who feel, well, I think Sinn Féin's going to win anyway, but I'm going to register my opposition and maybe vote People Before Profit. And that could then point to difficulties for Sinn Féin as well, maybe further down the line. Yeah, and that'll be fascinating to look out for when we're examining those results in the early hours of the 5th of July. We'll leave it there for now. Freya, thanks very much indeed. We'll hear more from you at the end of the programme. And of course, don't forget, there's a full list of the candidates standing across all 18 constituencies here on the BBC News NI website. Now, next to one of the biggest name guests we've had on Sunday Politics, Gary Lightbody, the lead singer of the internationally successful band Snow Patrol, has called on the Stormont Executive to increase its funding for the arts, especially in terms of the support it provides to artists at the start of their careers. He called the current lack of investment in the creative industries here short-sighted. I spoke to him last week.
Over the last 10 years, arts funding has been cut from 20 million to under 10 million. In Northern Ireland. The Republic of Ireland spent the equivalent of £25 per head on the arts. Wales spent £10 per head on the arts. Northern Ireland spends £5 per head on the arts. It's time to try and correct that, because it just keeps seeming like the arts funding gets cut every 10% every year. It's gone from 20 to 10, under 10 million.
What do those figures, Gary, say to you about the government's appreciation of the arts, understanding of how the arts works, and I suppose ultimately commitment to the arts here in Northern Ireland?
It's an underappreciation, to say the least. I think that our government perhaps has a view that arts will just take care of itself. But so they're all over there, just making music or TV shows or whatever we're doing, or writing plays or whatnot. We're the self-cleaning oven. That doesn't take into consideration all the institutions that require that funding to keep going, like the Lyric Theatre or the Ulster Orchestra. and all the artists that require some help with projects at the very first stage of those projects, new artists making art maybe for the first time or in their first sort of forays into creating. Sometimes they need a little bit of help here and there, just as we all people do from time to time. And then post-COVID as well, or during COVID, so many artists quit. So we lost so many artists, musicians, people left bands, they didn't come back, they went and became delivery drivers or whatever it was they did. They weren't making art anymore. And we set up a group during COVID, 7 of us in the music industry, and lots of different arts set up their own groups. And we were petitioning the government all the way through that to try and get funding, to try and release more funding for artists. And we were somewhat successful at certain moments, but it's still a massive deficit as compared to not just other countries but everything else. And obviously really vital and important services that should be above the arts, education and healthcare and infrastructure. All these things are vitally important so that we can survive, but we also need reasons to live and reasons to have joy in this world. And I think art is something that brings people so much joy, and it's probably the main thing other than sport.
But yet some people still see it clearly as a luxury. I mean, in that speech you gave at the Arts Council event, you talked about imagining a world without the arts and what that would look like. And it was a fairly bleak picture that you painted.
It is a fairly bleak picture without art. And if you think about all the arts, poetry, all the poetry, prose, playwriting, singing, dancing, theatre, orchestra, take all of that away. Where do you go? Where does anybody go? Like to what do you do when you need to feel connected to something in your darkest moments? Music has always been the thing for me. Music has always been that voice that has risen above all the other voices in my head, which I've spoken about in other interviews and I don't need to go into here. But it's always been that life raft for me, and I think it is for so many people. And we're very short-sighted as a country, as a community, as a people, as a place, if we don't at least respect the arts to the value that it's being respected in other places. And just to be 100% clear, when I'm talking about funding for the arts, I don't mean people like me or people that are doing well. I'm talking about people that aren't and can't possibly do it any other way other than getting a little bit of funding. And I've seen the funding through COVID, like seeing the applications for artists to apply for funding, and it's a many page document that most artists didn't have. I wouldn't have had a clue how to fill in even. So it's not easy even to get the money if it's available. So it's not like something that's just being dished out, to anybody that sort of puts their hand up. It is it's a process that everybody, artists, will have to go through, even if there is funding available.
Do you think it's easier to make that argument because the sums of money involved are actually quite small? Because the arts gets less in a year than health spends in a day. So a very small rebalance in the overall budget could potentially make a huge difference to arts organisations. So you set that on the one hand against the fact that we've heard successive health ministers here saying they need an extra 300 million, 400 million pounds a year just to stand still. And that leads people to say, well, we can't afford to be giving money to the arts because we need so much money for health or education or infrastructure, as you've said. And yet a tiny little amount would transform the arts landscape in a place like Northern Ireland.
It would be nice to see, and again, I just have to reiterate, I totally agree that those are the most important things in a society. We have to keep everybody alive, we have to educate, and we have to try and house as many people as possible. All these things are vitally important. But I think we, as you say, a little bit of money, especially as comparative to everything else, would change an awful lot of lives, an awful lot of musicians and artists and creators' lives. And if we could even have parity per capita with Wales, for example, it would be, that's the first goal, I think, is to try and get some parity with Wales, because I feel like that should be the lowest limit of where we're at.
And Wales is spending £10 per capita on arts funding at the moment. We're spending £5 per capita.
Yeah.
So a doubling.
It's a long way to go.
Yeah,
it's back 10 years ago.
It's a long way to go, but we're moving backwards actually.
Yeah.
And as you said, compared to the Republic, it's over £20 per capita. We are trailing behind, and the strange thing about that is that it's often said, isn't it, that Northern Ireland punches above its weight as far as the arts are concerned. I mean, people like yourself, it's a long list, Van Morrison, Liam Neeson, Kieran Hines, Seamus Heaney, Kenneth Branagh, Game of Thrones, the list goes on and on. So on the one hand, we produce people who really punch above their weight, and yet government funding is lower here than it is anywhere else on these islands. It's a hard thing to get your head around, isn't it?
It is a hard thing to get your head around, and I wonder whether that is one of the reasons why it is, because we seem to do quite well anyway, and that doesn't tell the whole story. There's so many artists that just with a little bit of help, they wouldn't have to move on to something else and leave art behind them. I know so many incredible artists that have had to do that, especially during COVID times. And there's speaking as a musician, and I don't mean to single out music, it's just because I am one, there's so many extraordinary artists, musicians, bands in Northern Ireland at the moment. We have an incredible array, and I know that there's so many that could do with some small help to get them to that next level, and it's very, very lacking.
So you took to the stage at the Arts Council event and you said what you said. You've kindly agreed to take part in our conversation again, which hopefully will bring these issues to the attention of more people. I just wonder what else you think you might be able to do. Where do you go from here? You've got a platform, you're using that platform. You obviously know a lot of people, you're well connected. There are people who really care about this. What else do you think you might be able to do?
I mean, we're sitting in the OES Centre, a place that myself and Stuart Bailey founded more than 15 years ago. We created this place with the help of an awful lot of people. This is what happens the great thing about arts in Northern Ireland is that when people collaborate, people get together, people want to help each other. This is not a problem one person can solve. This is a problem that a government should be helping with, and there's so many people in Northern Ireland that are given so much to the arts. It's just we need a little bit of help from the government.
But in engaging in this debate, in raising your head above the parapet, you now have a platform that you might be able to do something with. I mean, for example, would you sit down if the invitation came your way from the Arts Minister, Gordon Lyons, to talk to him, to try to persuade him about how he might look at things a little bit differently, which of course in turn might help him when he's sitting down with his executive colleagues making a demand for better arts funding? Would you play a part in that conversation if you were invited to?
Absolutely. I've said this many times, I'll say it again. I am not an expert in anything. But any help,
well, that makes two of us.
Any help that I can give for the arts community in Northern Ireland, they always know. I think they all know that I'm here anytime, and I would gladly speak to the Arts Minister, to the Communities Minister, Gordon Lyons, and have a conversation about how maybe we, what the future looks like.
Because you obviously believe you would have a persuasive case to make.
I believe that there is a persuasive case to make that the arts brings so much to any society, to any culture. It is a vital part of what makes us, us. For all the arguments that we may have, the thing that brings us together is art and music. And just watch people at a gig, then nobody cares where they're from or what their background is. They're all singing the same song together at the same time, and that's a beautiful thing for this country.
I've certainly heard people say the arts manages to do very well despite the lack of support that it gets. Just imagine what it could do if it was shown a bit of love.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's it really in a nutshell, isn't it?
100%.
Gary Lightbody speaking to me at the Oh Yeah Centre in Belfast. Let's bring Freya back into the conversation. You'd just love to be a fly on the wall. If Gordon Lyons does invite Gary Lightbody up for a coffee and a chat to Stormont, wouldn't you?
Yeah, and I mean, Gary is such a great advocate for the arts. You'd really like to see that meeting happen, and it makes you wonder, what is possible if you have people like Gary, other people who are prominent in the arts, people like Lisa McGee, Derry Girls, one of the best known experts from Northern Ireland. If you got a crowd of people like that up to Stormont and really making the case for the arts to the Minister, because they're not asking for much. When you look at the figures in terms of the spending per head in Northern Ireland, it is so small, particularly when you compare it to the rest of the UK, when you compare it to the Republic of Ireland. They're not asking for much, but yet the benefits can be so great.
Yeah, and just to recap on those numbers again, £5 per head of the population in Northern Ireland compared to £10 in Wales and nearly £22 in the Republic of Ireland. You can't really argue with that. It's pretty stark.
Yeah, and there is no excuse for that. And again, Gary made the arguments really well in that interview. When he talked about how, the arts brings joy in this world. For me, it's the difference between living life in 2D in a flat world and living it in 3D with all the experiences, with all the colour that can bring. There really is no excuse for such small amounts of money being spent on that, because we're not just talking about the impact on people like Gary Lightbody who've been successful. We're actually talking about how you create the climate whereby we get the next generation of Gary Lightbody or Lisa McGee's or whoever else. And that starts with spending on the arts that reaches down to the level of school children, that reaches down to the level of people who maybe wouldn't think to go to a concert or go to a play or something like that. It's about letting that filter through society and then seeing those effects. And
it's about understanding as well, I think, because it's a very complex landscape. It's about understanding how the arts actually can be an economic driver. And I think a lot of people maybe don't fully grasp that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I keep talking about Derry Girls, and it's far from the only example, but a very practical example of that. The Town Museum in Derry has an exhibition devoted to Derry Girls. They've had their best year ever because of that. And that's international tourism. That's hotel nights. That's spend in the city. That's hospitality spend. But I think we have to be wary about only looking at arts through the prism of the financial benefit, the emotional benefit, the benefit to well-being, so much more.
OK. Good to talk to you, Freya, as ever. Thank you very much indeed. That's all we've time for today. I'll be back with The View on Thursday night when I'll be speaking to the DUP leader, Gavin Robinson. We'll also have more election interviews on Sunday Politics next week. And of course, all our previous leaders' interviews are available to watch on iPlayer. And on Wednesday, we'll also have another of our Red Lines constituency profiles. We'll be looking at North, South and East Antrim, and that will be available on BBC Sounds. But for now, from everyone in the team, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.